The world had lost its mind. It wasn't a sudden shift, more like a slow, steady drip of weirdness. Gravity might decide to take a break. Trees could sprout polka-dotted leaves. And don't even ask about the pigeons. They were holding political rallies, the cheeky devils. In this topsy-turvy world, people clung to any semblance of normalcy. They pretended the laws of physics still applied, that common sense still held sway. But deep down, they knew. The universe had developed a sense of humor, and it wasn't very funny. Arthur Jenkins, however, refused to play along. A writer by trade, he craved logic, order, and a plot that made some semblance of sense. His apartment, a testament to his turmoil, overflowed with crumpled papers and half-finished sentences.
"What's the point?" he muttered, running a hand through his hair. His latest masterpiece, a thrilling detective novel, lay abandoned on his desk. How could he write a story about solving mysteries when the world itself was one giant, unsolvable puzzle? Arthur longed for the days when up was up, down was down, and pigeons stuck to pecking breadcrumbs. He yearned for a world where words had meaning and sentences led to logical conclusions. But alas, the universe had other plans. It seemed intent on driving him to the brink of madness, one absurd event at a time.
Arthur couldn't bear the thought of another day trapped in his apartment, battling existential dread and writer's block. He needed coffee, strong coffee, and a change of scenery. Maybe, just maybe, inspiration lurked outside the confines of his chaotic dwelling. He stumbled upon a peculiar cafe, its sign a riot of mismatched fonts proclaiming it the Absurdity Café. Arthur hesitated, a wave of dizziness washing over him. Was this a hallucination brought on by caffeine deprivation? He decided to risk it. He pushed open the door, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and something vaguely resembling burnt toast hitting him like a warm hug. A woman with bright pink hair and paint-splattered overalls sat at a corner table, sketching furiously in a notebook. She looked up, her eyes sparkling with an odd mix of mischief and wisdom. Arthur felt strangely drawn to her.
"I couldn't help but notice your drawings," Arthur ventured, his voice a little shaky. "They're quite something."
"The world's gone bonkers, hasn't it?" Alice said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But instead of fighting it, I'm learning to dance with it, embrace the chaos, find the beauty in the bizarre." S1. "Absurdity?" he echoed, taking a sip of his coffee. It was surprisingly good, with a hint of cinnamon and something that tasted suspiciously like butterscotch. S2. "Something indeed. I'm Alice, and these," she gestured to her sketchbook, "are my attempts to capture the absurdity of it all."
Arthur found himself drawn to Alice's unique perspective. Her embrace of the absurd, while unsettling, offered a strange sense of liberation. He confided in her about his writer's block, his struggle to find meaning in a world that seemed to have abandoned logic altogether.
"You need to meet someone," Alice said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "He's a bit of an oddball, but brilliant in his own way. He collects paradoxes like others collect stamps." She scribbled an address on a napkin, the ink shimmering with an almost otherworldly glow. "Tell him Alice sent you. He might just have the answers you seek."
Arthur stared at the address, a mixture of curiosity and trepidation churning in his stomach. It was a grand old building, the sign above its weathered doors proclaiming it the Library of Lost Tales and Found Paradoxes.
Arthur hesitated at the entrance, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He felt like Alice had pushed him through a looking glass, into a realm where the impossible was not just possible but commonplace. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy oak doors. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and something vaguely resembling burnt toast. The library was a labyrinth of towering bookshelves, winding staircases, and cozy nooks illuminated by flickering gas lamps.
Arthur felt a strange sense of peace wash over him, as if he had stumbled into a sanctuary where the chaos of the outside world couldn't reach him.
An elderly man with a shock of white hair and a twinkle in his eye peered at him over a pair of half-moon spectacles. He was perched on a ladder, rearranging a shelf of books with titles like The Art of Walking Backwards and A History of Upside-Down Thinking. "You must be Arthur?" the man said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his age. Alice called ahead, I've been expecting you, Professor Quibble, at your service. Or, as my more unconventional students call me, the Paradox Professor.
Arthur couldn't help but smile. This was going to be interesting.
Professor Quibble, his eyes twinkling with mischief, led Arthur through a secret door hidden behind a tapestry of a dancing unicorn. The first rule of finding meaning in a world of absurdity, he said, his voice echoing in the dimly lit passage, is to abandon all preconceived notions of logic. He pointed to a map hanging on the wall, its lines twisting and turning in on themselves like a Mobius strip. This, my dear boy, is the Map of Misdirection. It leads not to a destination, but to a state of mind.
Arthur stared at the map, his head spinning. It was like trying to navigate a maze designed by a madman. But how do we know where to go? He asked, his voice laced with a hint of panic.
The professor chuckled, his laughter echoing through the passage. We don't, my dear boy. That's the beauty of it. We simply let go of the need to know and embrace the journey. Welcome to the Hall of Illogical Conclusions.
The passage opened into a grand hall filled with strange and wonderful contraptions. Clocks ran backwards, staircases led to ceilings, and bookshelves rearranged themselves with a life of their own. Arthur felt like he had stepped into one of his own surreal stories.
Here we celebrate the beauty of the nonsensical.
Ready for a trip down the rabbit hole, Arthur?
Arthur hesitated, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He longed for the comfort of his old life, for the days when words had meaning and sentences made sense. But deep down, he knew there was no going back. He had crossed a threshold, and there was no telling what wonders and horrors awaited him on the other side. S1, The hall pulsed with a frenetic energy, a whirlwind of colors, sounds, and smells assaulting Arthur's senses. Gravity seemed to have taken a holiday, objects floating whimsically in midair. A group of penguins in bowler hats played a lively game of croquet with flamingos, while a tea party presided over by a grinning Cheshire cat floated precariously on a cloud of cotton candy. S2, let go, Arthur. Alice, unfazed by the madness, grabbed Arthur's hand and pulled him into a swirling waltz. S2, embrace the absurdity.
What is this madness?
Arthur stumbled at first, his feet tangled in the illogical dance steps. But as the music swelled, a strange sense of liberation washed over him. He began to laugh, a joyous, unburdened sound he hadn't realized he possessed.
You see, my boy, logic is merely a crutch. It's time to throw away your crutches and dance.
Their journey continued through a labyrinthine corridor lined with doors of every shape and size.
The paradox of choice is that too many options can be paralyzing.
Each door, Professor Quibble explained, represented a different path, a different choice.
There are so many...
Arthur felt a familiar sense of anxiety creeping in. He was a writer, used to crafting narratives with clear beginnings, middles, and ends. But here, in this realm of infinite possibilities, he felt lost, adrift in a sea of choices.
Don't overthink it, Arthur.
Alice, sensing his hesitation, squeezed his hand reassuringly.
Just choose a door that feels right, even if it doesn't make sense.
Arthur closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and reached out. His hand landed on a door that felt strangely warm to the touch. It was shaped like a giant question mark, its surface shimmering with an iridescent glow.
I think, she said softly, we've found a moment of clarity. S1, where are we? He whispered, his voice filled with awe.
The door swung open, revealing a tranquil garden bathed in golden light. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, their branches laden with fruit that shimmered like jewels. In the center of the garden stood a magnificent oak tree, its roots spreading out like welcoming arms. Arthur and Alice stepped through the doorway, the chaotic sounds of the hall fading into a distant hum. For the first time since embarking on this bizarre journey, Arthur felt a sense of peace wash over him. But as she spoke, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The oak tree groaned, its branches swaying violently. The fruit on the trees rotted before their eyes, transforming from shimmering jewels into decaying husks.
What's happening? Arthur cried out, his voice barely audible above the roar of the wind.
It seems, my dear boy, he said, his voice calm amidst the storm, that even clarity is fleeting in the face of absurdity.
Come on, Arthur. she shouted, her voice filled with exhilarating terror. It's time to dance with the absurd.
The garden, once a haven of tranquility, dissolved into a swirling vortex of chaos. The oak tree, its branches now gnarled and twisted, reached out towards them like grasping claws. The air crackled with an electric energy, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. And with that, Alice pulled him into the swirling vortex, their laughter echoing through the chaos as the world as they knew it dissolved around them.
Arthur, his head still spinning, slowly sat up, his gaze darting around in disbelief.
Welcome to the Dreamscape, Arthur, she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with delight. Here, the only rule is that there are no rules.
Ah, the Dreamscape, he murmured, his voice a soothing counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of the world around them. A place where logic goes to die and imagination reigns supreme.
The vortex spat them out, depositing them unceremoniously onto a checkerboard floor that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky above swirled with colors that defied the spectrum, a kaleidoscope of impossible hues. In the distance, a mountain range morphed into a flock of giant iridescent butterflies, their wings brushing the impossible sky. Alice, seemingly unfazed, bounced back to her feet, her laughter echoing through the surreal landscape. Arthur, struggling to find his footing on the shifting checkerboard floor, could only stare in bewildered silence. He felt like a character in one of his own abandoned manuscripts, a pawn trapped in a story that had veered wildly off course. Arthur, desperate for a handhold in this swirling sea of absurdity, clung to the last vestiges of his rational mind.
This is madness, he muttered, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of chirping teacups and trumpeting mushrooms that had suddenly sprung to life around them.
Let go, Arthur, she urged, her voice gentle yet firm. You can't fight the absurd with logic. You have to surrender to it.
Surrender? He scoffed, his voice tight with panic. But that's madness! It's... His words caught in his throat as the ground beneath them tilted precariously, threatening to send them tumbling into the swirling abyss below.
Professor Quibble, his expression unreadable, extended a hand towards Arthur.
Sometimes, my dear boy, he said, his voice a calm beacon in the storm.
A surge of defiance, fueled by a strange mix of terror and exhilaration, coursed through me. I'd spent my life trying to impose order on a world that defied categorization, only to find myself lost in a labyrinth of my own making. Perhaps it was time to embrace the chaos, to let go of the reins and allow myself to be swept away by the current.
Yes, Arthur, embrace the absurdity, dance with the nonsense. S1. And then, with a recklessness I had never known, I allowed myself to be pulled into the whirlwind. We spun and twirled across the checkerboard floor, our movements mirroring the chaotic beauty of the dreamscape. My initial fear giving way to a giddy sense of liberation, I found myself laughing, a sound that echoed through the surreal landscape, blending with the chirping of teacups and the trumpeting of mushrooms to form a bizarre yet strangely harmonious symphony.
As we danced, the boundaries between the real and the unreal blurred. The checkerboard floor transformed into a swirling galaxy, each square a portal to a different dimension. My senses heightened. I felt the weight of my old life, my anxieties and insecurities, melt away like snowflakes on a warm spring day. I saw glimpses of my own potential, flashes of stories waiting to be told, not with logic and reason, but with the raw, unfiltered energy of the absurd. I understood, with a clarity that surpassed any rational explanation, that the world was not meant to be dissected and analyzed, but experienced and embraced in all its messy, illogical glory.
You're starting to understand, Arthur. The truth, you see, is not found in logic or reason, but in the spaces between, in the whispers of the absurd.
My fingers danced across the keyboard, no longer hampered by the constraints of logic and reason. I wrote of dancing penguins and philosophical pigeons, of libraries that defied the laws of physics and dreamscapes, where reality was but a distant memory. My words flowed like water, carrying the reader along on a tide of delightful absurdity. My apartment, once a testament to my creative struggles, transformed into a haven of whimsical chaos. Stacks of paper, covered in ink-splattered stories and nonsensical poems, rose from the floor like enchanted forests. The air hummed with the energy of creation, a symphony of clattering keys, and my occasional bursts of laughter as my characters surprised me with their antics. I wrote through the night, fueled by black coffee and a newfound sense of purpose. The world outside my window might have been determined to adhere to its own peculiar brand of logic. But on the pages in front of me, I was free to create a universe of my own design, a world where absurdity reigned and nonsense was celebrated. I had danced with the absurd, embraced the chaos, and emerged from the experience transformed. I was no longer the writer who sought to impose order on a world that defied categorization. I was a conduit, a vessel through which the nonsensical, the whimsical, the utterly absurd could flow freely onto the page, ready to captivate and confound readers brave enough to embrace the journey.